Okay. Hi, I'm Kerry Vandermeer, and I'm interviewing Sas Colby, who is a wonderful artist living in Berkeley, California. And I'm going to start out with um, asking her, Sas, where did you grow up? And tell us a little bit about your family life.
Hi, Kerry. This is fun. I grew up in Massachusetts, right outside of Boston, and in a town called Cochituate. And nobody can say it. They said they always would say it sounds like a sneeze, but of course it's an Indian. It's an Indian name. It means something like running waters. So my family life, I have a sister who's a year older and a brother who's 2 years younger. My father, who was born in Italy, his name is Simone. Um, so he was an Italian immigrant and he was a builder and he built houses. So I grew up with a notion of building. The For me, it meant I could see an idea be developed on paper and then I could see it come to fruition in actual reality. And I think that seeing that and being part of that process was very important to me as somebody who's a builder, I could say, in art. My mother was a homemaker. She was very committed as a homemaker, but she was also committed as a community activist and involved in local politics and local issues, and with a very strong sense of right and wrong. That all of that colored my life. Her family was Swedish. So I do think there was a big dichotomy between the Swedes and the Italians and those two cultures. And I think that was also part of my it's part of my background, part of my constitution, I'm sure. I
Mhm.
always identified more with the sort of lighthearted Italians who are making wine in the cellar, you know, and music and that kind of Italian, life. That I identified more with that, I would say.
Yes, I think that's probably accurate for you. So it sounds like your family, especially father, was a great education for you growing up. And so did you know at any age or that you were going to be an artist, that that was going to be your career? Or was that just something that just evolved?
I think I think I always knew. I think I always had a desire for the kind of life of the senses that the arts gives us. And when I say, I mean the tactile senses, the visual senses, the notion of hearing music, how it's all kind of unified for me, and always really has been. I've never separated anything. I always wanted my life to be art, and I always tried to bring art into my life in terms of bringing color and harmony. It was harmony is still is very important to me, and making everything nicer. Also that sense of discovery. I mean, rarely do I know what I'm doing. I start off with an idea and it just evolves. And
Mhm.
I think I was like that as a child too. I know. I remember once wanting a red flowers in a certain place, and my mother was not an outdoor gardener. She had a lot of house plants inside, but she didn't garden outside the way I do. But I remember somehow digging up some red flowers, probably from somebody's yard, and bringing them home and putting in my own because I wanted red there.
To match your later in life glasses, red glasses.
Yes, right.
And looking at the color of the colors and the painting behind you, I think it is really an important example of your work because it is very colorful, and I find it very expressive, and you have a real free hand in your line quality, which I very much appreciate. Um, So you began your career as a textile artist. How did it change that you started doing paintings and mixed media?
Well, again, I could say that I mean, we're all wonderful in the Baywalk group looking back over the years, and we can see our own development. And yes, I did begin in textiles. I did begin essentially sewing, very traditionally, but the things that I sewed were not particularly traditional because this was in the late 60s, early 70s. And I was making fantasy garments, these big swooping capes and masks. They were essentially costumes, but they were costumes that people used to enlarge themselves. So they would go around in these swooping capes and we would stage processions and performances with them. So from that, I kind of morphed into um, always doing photography because photography was also part of the textile work, and especially what did these capes look like when they were worn, and and they were performed or they were in movement, because they were meant to sort of enlarge life that way. So the photographic aspect of it came in with doing slideshows of the work, and then slideshows that enhanced my teaching in terms of um, showing textures, showing sources of inspiration, showing art history, mixing all of this together so that my students could get a sense of that ideas are everywhere and all around us and they're not separate. So that photography was always been important to me. I actually was given a camera, one of those little teeny brownie cameras when I was 8. And the funny thing is in the 80s, I bought at a flea market a 1939 Brownie camera. It was a little bigger. And I went to Europe and took only that camera. And, it made all the pictures were vignetted. So they all looked like they were taken in the 40s, even though they were taken in the 80s. So I've always been involved in these alternative things like in doing photography, I basically concentrated on those funny old cameras. And also this other art form, photo stamps, where I miniaturized photographs and put them on stamps or had them printed the size of stamps. Yeah. And then that happened after I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. And also my textile work began to morph into mixed media work, where was sewing paper and cloth together, making mixed media kinds of books. And eventually it all kind of went into collage, photography, color Xerox, um, artist books. I have a large body of work in artist books. And then even the books I started painting on canvas. So it was natural for those painted canvas books to, I guess, morph into paintings. The books
Mhm.
were much more complicated to make than the paintings because each page has to relate and you have to, um, they were essentially movable canvases, the painted canvas books. So, but to me, it was like, whoa, maybe if I paint my books with paint on canvas, um, people will look at them because the other books are so miniature and small and hard to see. But I think the
And they're
challenge,
hard to display too in galleries.
oh,
Uh,
impossible to display, and nobody
yeah,
can touch them. But the
right.
painted canvas books, people can touch.
Mhm.
And but I also think that there's a real challenge in working in the two-dimensional beautiful thing that you put on the wall, and I do love always resolving that.
Mhm.
Um, and so anyway, there you go. So it's all one. I still do all of it. I'm still sewing. I'm not making capes, but I'm still sewing, and I'm still doing a lot of photography. And
Did you sew your own clothes too? What
I did as a,
I sewed
yeah.
it up.
Did you?
Well, it was interesting in looking at your website and looking at your resume, which is really extensive. You've got some wonderful commissions and you're in collections from museums in universities and thing. But anyway, I was noticing our commonality of being going to Fiberworks textile school in Berkeley, in when there was this renaissance going on in textiles. And I didn't know you then, but we were there similar times anyway. And
I
so our
think so.
backgrounds are, there's a lot of similarities and crossovers.
Well, I think also the moving to Berkeley in 1975, mostly as an artist who worked in textiles, and having the Fiberworks Center for Textile Art there, that provided such an incredible community for us.
Yeah.
Also, I was an advocate for textile work being taken seriously, um,
Mhm.
where it's always had been marginalized, you know. So that community, I do think community is very important in art making.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
So you want to talk a little bit about your current work, which are paintings of, well, I guess the series is called Word.
They're called
So
word paintings, yes. Well,
there's
the
a lot
one
of
thing I didn't mention in that flow of media is that behind it all is a kind of use of language. And even in the capes, there were secret messages sewn into the capes. And of course, working in artist books, the text was always part of a joining with an image. And the text often became the image. And I would write the text, but often I wouldn't write it in advance. It would just kind of arise and kind of show up on the page. A word would infuse itself into something. And that's how these paintings became came into being, in that, I mean, I love music and I love the words in music. The first one I made in this series said, "Send in the clowns." And it also happened to coincide with the uh, unfortunate election. And then I made one called "Back to the Garden." So there were phrases that resonated in some kind of a way, or some of them happy messages, some of them questions like, does everyone have a soul? Who will die next? Um, the people you love get old. I
Mhm.
mean, these were thoughts, you know, things that I'm thinking about. And I just made the words into paintings, and they're
Mhm.
small. I have another one that my very favorite is called "A Perfect Moment," because my idea is, and I mean, they're 9 by 12, that you could put a phrase like this in a painting and someone could hang it on their wall, and they could see it every day, and they could be reminded that as of an opportunity for a perfect moment. You know?
And